Experience the future of packaging and processing up close and in action. Explore groundbreaking innovations, engage with hands-on solutions, and connect with the experts transforming the industry. See how these advancements can revolutionize your products, production lines, and business. It all starts here. Don't miss out. Register today at packexpolasvegas.com/unpackedpod. You're listening to Unpacked with PMMI, where we share the latest packaging and processing industry insights, research, and innovations to help you advance your business. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Unpacked with PMMI. I'm your host, Sean Riley. Whether it be RFID just after the turn of the century or sustainability, which is starting to gain traction after 15 years as the next big thing, few industries do buzzwords quite like packaging and processing. The term predictive maintenance has been widely used in recent years, but with no real agreed upon industry-wide definition, it is teetering ever so close to remaining in buzzword status. The result is a lot of engineers and operations managers missing out on an emerging technology that has the potential to be extremely disruptive. Adrian Lloyd and Blake Griffin from Interact Analysis come on the pod to discuss their research that led to PMMI's Predictive Maintenance White Paper. The pair examine how they see implementation of predictive maintenance technologies playing out in two different parts of the plant, and how these trends will merge over time. They know their stuff, and after this pod, you will too. And I would now like to welcome Adrian and Blake to the podcast. First of all, welcome, and then tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Yeah, hi, Sean. This is Adrian Lloyd. So I'm CEO of Interact Analysis. We're an organization about 4 years old. We look at technologies in industrial automation, manufacturing, also warehouse technology, robotics, on and off highway vehicle trends. We're market intelligence providers. And technology analyst. So I've been doing this for about 25 years. And my background has predominantly been in the manufacturing space most of the time that I've been active, but have covered other topics too.
And my name's Blake Griffin. I'm a senior analyst at Interact Analysis. I kind of cut my teeth in market research looking at industrial automation as a topic. Adrian and I have looked at predictive maintenance for a little over 2 years now, and it's been a really, really interesting topic to cover. It's one of my favorite subjects to discuss, so I'm happy to be here today with you guys and discussing it.
Awesome. We are happy to have you both. Blake, you don't play for the Detroit Pistons, right?
I don't, but I do get that almost weekly. So, yeah.
Okay. It was cheap. It was a cheap one on my part, but I figured I wanted to clear that up in case people got all excited and thought they were going to hear Blake Griffin talk about predictive maintenance when they were expecting him to talk about Kardashians or playing basketball.
Yeah.
Let's say just to get the definition up front, because I know this is something that we were talking offline beforehand, and even I kind of confused the two. Especially with predictive maintenance and preventative maintenance. So let's kind of get a definition up front to make sure everybody understands, because predictive maintenance to me, or for some people, is making sure, simple things, the plugs are plugged in, things are oiled, the nuts are tightened, things like that. That's what people think is predictive maintenance. Can you guys kind of give us a definition of what you guys define predictive maintenance as?
Yeah, so there's a spectrum of maintenance efforts or strategies that companies can undertake, and you can be anywhere on that spectrum, and people are right now, and most people are at the wrong end of it. And so there's many ways in which you could decide to create categories to define the types of maintenance that you're doing, but we try to simplify it into 4 main categories, which I'll talk very quickly about. So the most basic strategy is not a strategy at all, really. It's what we call run to fail. So you ignore that asset, and then when it stops working, you replace it. That's a reasonable strategy to adopt for devices that can be switched out and kept on in inventory and doesn't take long to replace. So And a lot of people still doing that. The next level would be preventative maintenance. And the idea here is it's a time-based method for going up to an asset periodically and just doing basic maintenance on it, the sort of things that you were talking about. So lubricating it, etc. And that's probably the other most common strategy that's currently deployed. What's notable about that is there's no real effort to understand what is going on with the asset itself. Mm-hmm. It's purely a case of it's this month, let's go up there and sort this motor out. So we're now getting into more advanced approaches. Next one we call conditional monitoring, or condition monitoring, I should say. And in this approach, you're actually using some sort of handheld device, or sometimes it's a device that you can push around and go in and measure performance characteristics of the asset, whether it's a motor or a fan or a compressor or a pump, etc. And often vibration, temperature, those sort of things can be measured. And now you're actually gathering data about the asset. The condition monitoring approach tends to be done on quite large intervals. So often you'll hear monthly, or it could be even 6 monthly, when, especially in large plants, there's some critical assets might go a long period before they're actually gone and monitored the condition. And then when we're talking about predictive maintenance, so now we're at the most advanced end of maintenance strategy spectrum. And the idea here with predictive maintenance is to increase the number of measurements that we're doing on our assets to the point where we can start analyzing the data. And then, as we know, using advanced data technologies that we see in all different sorts of applications, if you get a lot of data, you can start making meaningful interpretations about what is happening, what that data is telling us. And that's what predictive maintenance is. And we're quite early on in the adoption cycle of this technology. And it is a real opportunity for anyone involved with plant maintenance or producing machines should be seriously talking about this right now.
Yeah, and I think another point to make is there is a lot of confusion with the terminology. Even, in preparation for this podcast, we were getting the terms preventative and predictive confused. It has been the bane of my existence, I would say, to always have to redefine and make sure people understand exactly what preventative and predictive. And unfortunately, we just use a term that is very, very similar. But predictive fundamentally is utilizing as much data as possible. It is a big data approach to maintenance. The more data you have, the better trained your algorithms will eventually become. Because what you're trying to do is essentially forecast out how your machinery is going to perform. And if you're able to do that effectively, you are using as many data points from as many sources as possible. It gets confused with preventative maintenance, and we saw this in the data a bit whenever we produced the white paper for the PMMI, but we also saw it in the interviews that we conducted after running that survey, that people would be describing a predictive strategy in their words, but in reality, it was a preventative maintenance strategy. It was doing the basics that the manufacturer is recommending, albeit it was in an organized fashion, but it wasn't utilizing that big data approach to try and forecast exactly when an asset is likely to fail.
And for the record, for those listening, I was the one confusing the two when we were talking beforehand. Adrian and Blake knew exactly what they were talking about. I unfortunately was flipping the two words, which apparently, I guess, isn't that uncommon. Even the way you just explained it in that last sentence makes sense that, the preventative versus the predictive, if you even just look at the words, it's showing that one is obviously not going forward, whereas the other one is just kind of trying to nip things in the bud before they happen. Okay, with that in mind, I guess, what are the factors that are, because as you guys are saying, predictive maintenance is kind of something that is sort of emerging now. So why isn't everybody jumping on board with it? What are some of the things that are preventing companies from adopting predictive maintenance?
Well, I think we kind of hit on it just then. I think it's illuminating when you see how often the terms get confused. There is an educational aspect to it that needs to occur. If we looked at the data that was produced out of the survey we ran through PMMI, one of the top responses for barriers to this technology was just an unfamiliarity with the technology that's involved. And this can be a couple things. I mean, there are solutions out there that are essentially turnkey solutions where you are utilizing a sensor in conjunction with that sensor manufacturer's software to get a read into data points like vibration and temperature. But that is still a pretty new product. So people are still struggling to work this into their operations, and even just to know that the product exists, I think still needs to occur. The other thing is there is a number of legacy devices I would describe. So these are drives and motors and any devices that are installed a while ago where they don't have the newest technology on board. There still needs to be an understanding of how to bring those devices online. If they don't have the features inherent in them, you have to look elsewhere to figure out how exactly to bring those online to get data from those devices. Again, that comes back to education, but also as these technologies get more and more sophisticated, you'll see the ease of implementing all of this become much easier. Another barrier, which I think hits on cybersecurity concerns mainly, is a lot of these predictive maintenance technologies utilize remote monitoring, meaning you would be able to look at your assets from a remote location, utilizing the data in the cloud, essentially. That is a bit of a concern for a lot of OT and IT departments. They're worried about opening that door onto their factory floor. They're worried about people either hacking into the technology and running the manufacturing plant awry. That's obviously a big concern. But also there are certain operational secrets that you could derive from such data that people may be concerned about putting out there. That's another barrier that we see quite often. That one I think is coming down as COVID has kind of illuminated this need to have visibility into assets without actually being on the factory floor. But it's still a pretty prominent barrier that companies are starting to figure out how to overcome.
I think if you're a machinery vendor and you're looking to implement predictive maintenance or provide that within the machines that you're offering, you need to be thinking about how you enable that to be utilized purely by the end user without any need for the machine builder to get involved. And we see from the survey that the end users, or CPGs, however you want to describe them, are they do a lot of maintenance in-house. That was the most common method that we saw from the survey. So they need help with their maintenance, and predictive maintenance is an opportunity. And I want to talk about this in the terms of an opportunity, because why are we talking about this now? Why is it only recently that predictive maintenance has become a major focus? I think there's two factors relating to that. One is just the advent of digitalization and the opportunity to do more using technology, Industry 4.0, etc. Predictive maintenance is often ranked as like the most easy accessible technology to benefit from with a digitalization deployment right now. So that's factor one. But the more important factor from our perspective is the availability of smart sensors when they started getting released. And the most notable launch took place at Hanover about 5 or 6 years ago. ABB launched their smart sensor product. What it is a device that basically attaches to the side of a motor. You can now attach them to gearboxes or bearing blocks, and that smart sensor wirelessly communicates information about that asset to a gateway nearby that then connects to your digital infrastructure, from where you can do your analytics. Now, what's enabled those smart sensors to be adoptable and usable right now, especially from a cost perspective, is the cost of MEMS technology, which is, MEMS technology is the same technology we see in our phones that detect like the motion of the phone. That technology has come down so much in price because of its adoption in consumer electronics. It's all of a sudden you can start looking at deploying this on remote assets in a very cost-effective manner. So a typical smart sensor will cost you about $200 right now to purchase, and we expect those prices to come down. There is a cost for the software side of connecting to that device, but if you think you can take a smart sensor for $200, stick it on an asset that might be worth anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, and one that may be very critical to your supply, and start gathering information about it, that is, in my mind, a disruptive technology. And it's really driven by the cost, the improvements of the price performance of MEMS technology over time.
Interesting. And to go back to what Blake said, it is something we've done a bunch of these podcasts during the COVID, and we've seen how allowing remote access as a broad term has obviously, I guess, become more lenient in terms of allowing it, because out of necessity, where people had to allow access to their plants because people couldn't get into them, people couldn't travel, things like that. And it's kind of like a silver lining that's come out of this, where people have in our industry in particular, have started to understand that it is a safe way to be able to do these things without having to travel to the plants and, have a hotel, have all that stuff for training purposes or maintenance purposes. So we have seen that remote access kind of come down and people be more willing to allow it, which I think would obviously help with this predictive maintenance as well. So I guess, how are people implementing predictive maintenance? How are they using it now to figure out their assets?
Yeah, so that's a good question. If you go back to what I was just saying about the smart sensors, basically there were predictive maintenance solutions that were being implemented before the MEMS technology really started being used to measure other assets. And most commonly what we're seeing is a software-based platform. A lot of the large manufacturing software vendors offer software that can perform predictive maintenance, but it works on the assumption that there's already data there to analyze, and certainly large plants, anything that has a DCS or a large process type automation system, tend to have historians, which are storage devices in effect that measure key information about the plant. And these software vendors are tapping into that data and are able to already dashboard terrific amount of useful information about the plant and about the assets within the plant. But the limiting factor here, and this is the point that Blake's constantly always reminding people to think about, is that you have to ask yourself two questions. One is, what assets am I monitoring, and which ones am I not that I should be? And that is where the latter question is the important one. Is because when you look at these process systems, only so many assets are digitally connected in a manner where status information about the asset is being monitored. So I don't know what the number would be, but I would suspect that it's less than 20% of assets in a plant, as a gut feeling. I'm sure there's plants out there that are very well monitored, but for the most part, there's a huge number of motors are the biggest. We think the most vulnerable asset in plants, because take an induction motor, it can be in the plant for 30 years. And so we are starting to implement predictive maintenance is using a combination of the two, using software to measure already connected assets. But now they're starting to think about the assets that are not connected and the ones that need to be. Not all assets need to be connected. I think you need to be tactical around what you do, where you do deploy this technology. But ones that are in a critical path are the ones that people should be looking to adopt smart sensors to get that measurements on those assets out.
For the first time, PMMI members and Pack Expo exhibitors can gain a true insight into the competitive marketing landscape within the packaging and processing industries. See real data from PMMI Media Group campaigns on engagement from validated, verified end users, including the amount of captured leads and even how Pack Expo booth visits align with pre-show marketing. You'll also get a full view of campaign strategies in market across all 12 months for competitors in your product category with variations by channel. This kind of intel has never been available before. Request your custom competitive analysis report now at pmmi.media/CAR. That's pmmi.media/CAR.
Yeah, I think one of the examples I've seen in recent memory, so I wrote an article recently about Amazon's announcement back in December, talking about the announcement of their smart sensor, similar to the sensors that are produced by ABB or Siemens or any of the major motor manufacturers. I think it's an interesting release because it builds upon their broader digitalization initiative within industry. But it also, if you just look at Amazon in that solution over time, it really tracks well with the progress of the market. So what Adrian was talking about with the software-based approach, back in 2018, Amazon released a product called SiteWise, which is effectively a software-based approach to gathering data on assets that could offer that data up. And as it's progressed and as the market's become more willing to adopt smart sensors, they now have a sensor-based approach. So you're getting that that full solution now where you have a software-based approach on one side and a sensor-based approach on the other. Over time, I think you'll see more and more users utilizing both of those approaches. But I think that it speaks volumes to the implementation and how people are beginning to implement predictive maintenance over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think the Amazon example is interesting. The reason we talk about Amazon right now, and there's other vendors we could talk about, is because Amazon literally launched their smart sensor product in December, along with the various gateways and other technology that you see to deploy these smart sensor solutions. But the fact that Amazon is not a company that we traditionally think of as being a hardware style vendor in industrial has added this capability. Highlights the perceived opportunity that they see in this market. And generally, as a rule of thumb, where Amazon goes, money follows.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking when you said that is whether we think of them as, someone, like you said, that's deeply involved in hardware. When they start to involve themselves in something, it's probably the rest of us should start paying attention to it, because inevitably, like you said, it's going to become a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think if anything, you can just take that announcement as a signpost for how much attention this market is getting, because they don't enter things lightly. Like, they're not entering a market that is projected to be 500 million to $1 billion. They're expecting this market to be multi billions, which I think is completely reasonable, and we can get into that in a bit.
And it goes to, if you're listening to this, or if you read our packaging and predictive maintenance white paper that you guys put together for us, and just kind of dismissing it as something I can worry about down the road, it's kind of proof positive that this is something that's here now, and it's obviously growing with some of the biggest players in the game. So you might want to get on board as soon as possible, or risk, kind of being left behind. So I guess, what is the scale that, predictive maintenance technologies are currently being used?
So we can reference some data from our report. So aside from the PMMI, we produced a report looking at predictive maintenance specifically in motor-driven systems within industry. And I recognize that is a very specific application for predictive maintenance, and it can be much broader than that. But it was a line in the sand we wanted to draw to get some actionable data. The current adoption of predictive maintenance, I would say, from a revenue standpoint within motor-driven systems, is relatively small if you're comparing it to other industrial markets. I think we had a market size which comprises portable monitoring devices, like Adrian was talking about at the beginning, smart sensors, their dedicated software, and some of the dedicated gateways that are used for predictive maintenance. That entire market, as of 2019, when we interviewed and collected data, was about 130 million. And we're expecting that to grow to somewhere between 1 and 1.5 billion by the end of our forecasts in 2024. So it's a huge amount of growth, and it's worth noting that forecast was done before Amazon had entered the market and brought a lot more attention to it. So it was also done before April of 2020. So at the time, there's a lot of uncertainty with how COVID was going to impact manufacturing as a whole, and thus the investment into things like this. So I think we were a little bit conservative in our forecasts in the short term. That should give you a picture for our CAGR. The growth rate over the 4 years or 5 years was about 40%, which is pretty staggering growth for any market.
Yeah, just let me clarify one point. It's important that we didn't include in that value the software that we were talking about, a general purpose software that have predictive maintenance functionality. That stuff's actually quite hard to measure from a revenue perspective.
Yeah.
Because often, something like predictive maintenance will get buried in all different sort of plant applications. So we excluded that. So that's purely looking at, when we talked about software, it's the software being provided by the smart sensor companies, not this general purpose software used to analyze historian data.
Yeah, I think it's still early days for predictive maintenance. As we said, there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. But when it hits, it'll hit really, really quickly, because once this technology has the kinks worked out, and I think the value proposition that it brings is so hard to ignore from anyone that is manufacturing at a large scale, that you'll see it start being implemented very, very fast.
That's what I'm hearing, and I'm following all this. And then we kind of talked offline about this, and that guys also cover this again in the white paper, but it's something I think I should bring up while we're talking. Is our membership for PMMI is mostly the people that are making these machines. that are then going out to the consumer packaged goods, the end users, people that are then using them in their plants. So if I'm the guy making the machine, let me dumb this down. How am I getting value out of this? Because I've sold the machine. Like, I made my machine, I sold it. It's in the customer's hands now. How is this helping me, predictive maintenance, or how am I finding a way to make this help me?
So there's a couple of things. I think what you put forth there is a conflict of interest that dates back, as far as markets go. I mean, the idea that you're selling something with the idea of it breaking at some point so you can, sell another one. That obviously is a concern and something to think about. It's a bit of like I said, a conflict of interest that's been around for a while. I think companies are beginning to address that by looking at how they can price these machines in ways that look at things that help the customer and align the incentives between the customer and the supplier, rather than having that conflict of interest present. One of the things that we've seen is replacing the capex expenditure with an opex. So essentially making the machine as a service rather than selling it as a capital expenditure. A couple of palletizer companies are doing that. I think one of them was Premier Packaging and another one was Robex, if I remember correctly. They are effectively tracking the number of pallets that they create and charging the customer based on the production rather than the machine as a whole. The reason that predictive maintenance is important for that solution is that suddenly you have an incentive to keep that machine running as long as possible because you're basically retaining ownership of it. That's one aspect of it. The other is it opens up a wide range of service opportunities for machine builders. Having this visibility into the health of an asset gives the machine builder the opportunity to service that and provide a better level of service, which I think is important.
I was going to talk about that second point because one of the things that the PMI was kind enough to do was share with us the aftermarket white paper that they'd previously conducted. I think it was in 2019. And, if you ask me what's in it for the machine builder, well, it's the simple premise of giving the customer what they want and what they need. Some of the key findings from that survey were related to challenges with finding the right staff to conduct maintenance. There seems to be a reduced talent pool. It's highly competitive trying to find the people that can do this work. So not only can you solve that problem for your customer by building in technology that can predictively maintain and minimize the amount of maintenance needs to be done on a machine, that's adding a lot of value from the customer's perspective. But as Blake says, that you can then productize that. One of the other findings from that aftermarket white paper was that most companies have increased aftermarket spend for packaging machinery. And there seems to be this onus to rely more on the machine builders. So if the OEMs can build a service around that and then automate it to a large extent using a technology like predictive maintenance, then that looks like an outstanding opportunity from my perspective.
Yeah, and another point to make is I think it's inevitable that this technology is going to be demanded by end users. So in order to remain competitive, you have to consider how you're going to implement this, or else your product won't be as competitive in the marketplace. I think it's hard to ignore that as a driver for machine builders.
And I think that was actually what you beat me to the punch there, was that kind of cleared up what the next thing I was going to kind of tack on there was, if this is an inevitable thing that people are going to want, it's important to get on ahead of it now and figure out ways, as you gave examples of, to find value in doing this, because again, we're building these machines. We want to have these, awesome, robust machines that are in these people's plants for years that we can, service or retrofit, et cetera, et cetera. But the most important thing is to have it be something that is going to stay with the technology and with the times. And this predictive maintenance is something that is clearly emerging. So we want to have this, kind of get in on the ground floor with it. So I think that was a great way of explaining it and kind of putting it into terms that our membership at least could understand. So I guess going forward, what's the expectation? What do you guys see through, let's say, 2024? What, the next couple of years, how do you see this sort of coming out, and where are we going to be in 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah. So let's first talk about 2024, and then I'll talk a little bit about some future trends that beyond our forecast, I think is worth noting.
Perfect.
Through 2024, I think there's going to be a greater melding of the technologies, the software solution and the sensor solution. Like I said, the way in which you get predictive maintenance to work most effectively is if you're utilizing as many data points as possible. It reduces the learning curve of whatever algorithm that you've employed, and it just generally gives you better views into your assets. So utilizing that data that's already available in some of your smart devices, if you're utilizing a historian or if the device can produce that on a bespoke basis with the smart sensor solution, I think is going to become more and more popular. In the short term, it's probably going to be more driven by the smart sensor in terms of like market growth. But over the long term, definitely utilizing a combination of both, the most sophisticated solution that's out there right now. Looking ahead to beyond 2024, I don't think it's any secret why some of the earliest companies that have started producing smart sensors are also motor vendors. I think there is an expectation that over time, this sensor technology will be integrated within motors. We are a ways away from that. I think there's a lot of standardization that needs to occur. And obviously the technology has to be proven more before every motor is shipped with one. But if you look at the companies that were first to this market, you're talking ABB, Siemens, and WEG, and those are some of the largest motor manufacturers in the world. I think that just points to kind of their end game with the technology in the future. There are companies that produce smart sensors that aren't motor vendors or don't produce any sort of motor system equipment. And what we're seeing from them is more and more partnerships being announced with some of the components around the motor system. So they're not necessarily focusing on partnering with motor vendors for obvious reasons, because competition with what I just said about the integration. But we're seeing them partner with companies like Grundfos, which is a pump manufacturer, some fan pump and compressor manufacturers, all with, in my opinion, the idea that this technology will be integrated within those components going forward. So if they can develop that relationship in the near term, it'll bode well for them as that trend kind of falls into place.
Yeah, I think it's a really good important point to make here is that whilst it is quite an immature market, not just from adoption rate, but also from the technology, the rollout of the technology, its availability. There are, I think, the automation vendors that we talk to are increasingly thinking about this, and they have to look at themselves where they are in that machinery architecture and ask themselves, how can we add value from a predictive maintenance point of view? Because I think that this is something that's going to be, like I liken it to 30 years ago when they first had cars coming out with electric windows. It was a premium add-on. Now you buy, most cars got electric window built in. And I feel like that's exactly what's going to happen with predictive maintenance technology. If you're an automation vendor, you need to be looking to integrate this and offer it as a value add and a differentiation versus your competitors. We're already seeing examples of that in the motor drives market, which is, inverters, the devices that attach to motors and control their speed. And the way most motor drives operate is they use current sensors as part of the motor control algorithm. And so they're actually measuring current and voltage of the motor. We've been told over 70% of failures can be detected just from measuring those two items. You don't even need to measure vibrational temperature. And so if motor drive vendors were to start taking that very same data that they're using to model where the motor position is to control its speed or its torque, and use that data instead to understand performance characteristics of the asset, then suddenly it makes it a lot easier for a packaging machinery company, for example, to implement predictive maintenance. Instead of having to go and use sensors and configure a gateway device, etc., all of a sudden things like drives are able to provide a lot of that functionality for you. And we've seen Danfoss is a leader in this space. They use the term the drive as a sensor, and we see them as one of the pioneering companies in the rollout of predictive maintenance for motor drives. But there's other opportunities too. So the integration of this technology, or acceptance of the need for this technology in all different types of automation equipment, is going to be a key enabler and make it easier as time goes on.
So much great information that I can't appreciate enough. Adrian and Blake, both of you taking time out of obviously your busy days to come on here and talk about this. I've read the white paper. I urge everyone listening to this, Packaging and Predictive Maintenance and In-Depth Assessment from PMMI, to go on pmmi.org and get the white paper. It explains it in a way that even I can understand, which is going a long way. So I just want to, again, thank both Blake and Adrian for coming on here and explaining this to us. Gentlemen, thanks again.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Please rate, review, and subscribe. To do that, go to the iTunes podcast or Spotify app on your phone and search for Unpacked with PMMI.